What happens when trust breaks and secrets spiral out of control? Tunde thought he knew his wife, Ifeoma, until the day he faked his death to uncover the truth. But what he discovers changes everything. Will their love survive the lies? Subscribe now to find out if Tunde's plan is worth the risk. Tunde sat at the edge of the bed, his mind racing. His marriage to Ifeoma had once been full of love, but lately, there had been a distance between them, one that he couldn't ignore. Whispers, late-night phone calls, and strange disappearances had become part of his everyday life. Tunde had tried to confront Ifeoma, but each time, she had a new excuse or an explanation. That night, as Ifeoma left for work, Tunde made a decision. He would fake his own death. It was extreme, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The next morning, the news of Tunde's death hit Ifeoma like a storm. She was sitting at her desk when her phone buzzed with the breaking news. As Ifeoma cried in the hospital, surrounded by family and friends, Tunde watched from a distance. He had followed her there, wearing a disguise. It was then that Tunde realized, maybe she wasn't hiding something sinister after all. Maybe she was hiding the truth because she was protecting him. But what was she protecting him from? Later that night, Tunde returned to his old home, now a place he no longer recognized. Ifeoma was alone, her face pale and exhausted from the day's events. She stood by the window, staring out into the dark night. Tunde watched her, aching to go to her, to hold her, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Tunde continued to watch Ifeoma from the shadows. What he discovered was not what he expected. She wasn't living the carefree life of someone who had gotten away with a secret. Instead, she was struggling. The bills piled up. Her friends tried to console her, but she was distant, distracted, as if her mind was always somewhere else. Tunde realized then that she had been carrying a heavy burden. The question was, what was it, and why hadn't she told him about it? Tunde makes a decision to get closer to Ifeoma, but his every move is risky. If she finds out he is alive, will she be angry, or will she finally open up? Tunde knows he has to tread carefully, but with each passing day, he becomes more entangled in the web of secrets and lies that surrounds their marriage. Weeks had passed since Tunde's death, and with each day, the mystery surrounding Ifeoma deepened. She was a shadow of the woman he had once known, isolated, burdened, and anxious. He continued to follow her from a distance, watching her every move, hoping to uncover the truth. One evening, Tunde saw Ifeoma leave the house in a hurry, her face tense. He had followed her for days now, and tonight, his heart pounded with anticipation. This was the first time she had ventured out after dark since his supposed death. He trailed her through the city, keeping his distance, blending into the shadows. They passed through narrow alleyways, and Tunde's curiosity grew. The trail led her to a small run-down building at the edge of town, nothing like the places Ifeoma would normally visit. She entered, disappearing into the darkness. Tunde waited outside, his pulse quickening. What was she doing here? Was this where the secrets were buried?
Inside the building, Ifeoma sat across from a man in his 40s, his appearance unkempt and disheveled. He handed her a brown envelope, and she reached into her purse, pulling out a wad of cash. Tunde's heart sank. What was going on? Was Ifeoma involved in something criminal? He couldn't take it any longer. He crept closer to the window, trying to catch every word. From what he could hear, the conversation sounded serious, but not about anything illegal. Ifeoma's voice was low but urgent. "I can't keep doing this," she said, sounding desperate. Tunde had heard enough. His suspicion had grown into something far more troubling. Ifeoma wasn't just hiding a secret. she was involved in something dangerous, something that could destroy their lives.
Later that night, Tunde stood in front of her house, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. He had always known Ifeoma to be strong, independent and capable. But now, she seemed so vulnerable, so trapped in a world he didn't understand. What had happened to her? Who was this man she was meeting? And why did she look so scared? His heart ached, torn between confronting her and continuing his secret investigation. He knew he couldn't stay in the shadows forever. As Tunde paced, a thought struck him. Maybe it was time to confront Ifeoma directly, but in a way that wouldn't expose everything. He needed to get close to her again, to find out the truth, but carefully. The next day, Tunde put his plan into action. Disguised once again, he showed up at Ifeoma's office. He knew she wouldn't expect him there, not after what had happened. He had planned for it, his death had left a hole in her life. As Tunde approached her office, he caught sight of Ifeoma through the glass. She was on the phone, speaking softly, but her eyes were filled with a mixture of sadness and fear. He hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. When she looked up, her face instantly changed. Her expression went from pained confusion to shock as she saw who was standing in the doorway. Tunde. Ifeoma's voice was barely a whisper. Is it really you? For a moment, Tunde could only stand there, staring at her. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. The tension in the air was thick, and Tunde's heart raced in his chest. I thought you were dead. Ifeoma stammered, her hand trembling as she reached for her phone. How are you here? Tunde closed the door behind him slowly, stepping into the room with quiet resolve. I faked it, Ifeoma, he said, his voice low but steady. I had to know the truth. What are you hiding from me? What's going on? The room was silent for a moment, the air thick with the tension of Tunde's question. Ifeoma stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock and fear. She seemed to struggle with her emotions, unable to speak. Tunde could see the pain and confusion in her eyes, and for the first time, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Had he pushed her too far? Ifeoma slowly lowered her phone, her hands trembling. Tunde, please, She stopped herself, taking a deep breath before sitting down behind her desk. The weight of the situation was finally sinking in. Tunde didn't move. He remained standing, watching her, waiting. You faked your death? She whispered, almost in disbelief. For this? To what end, Tunde? I needed to know what was going on, Tunde said quietly, his voice strained with the weight of the lie he had lived. I thought you were hiding something from me. And now I know that I was right. But I didn't expect this, Ifeoma. What have you gotten yourself into? Ifeoma's eyes filled with tears as she looked away. She ran her hand over her face, clearly struggling with something deeper than she had let on. I never wanted you to find out this way, she said, her voice breaking. But you gave me no choice. You've been distant for months. I didn't know how to protect you anymore. Tunde's heart sank. Protect me? From what? Ifeoma hesitated, her gaze flickering to the door, as if she were afraid someone might overhear. The silence between them grew heavy, and then, with a quiet sigh, she finally spoke. There are people, Tunde, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. People I got involved with before you and I got married. I was trying to get out of it. I was trying to protect you from them. Tunde frowned, confusion mixing with the growing fear in his chest. Involved with who? What kind of people? Ifeoma closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts before continuing. It's a group. A powerful group. They're involved in things I never should have gotten close to. But when I met you, I thought I could leave it all behind. I thought I could escape. But when you started to notice things, when you started asking questions, She trailed off, looking defeated. Tunde stepped closer, trying to understand. So all this, the secret meetings, the money, the lies, it's all because of them. You were trying to protect me from them. Ifeoma nodded, her voice barely audible now. I never wanted you to know, I never wanted to drag you into it. But when you started asking questions, when you started noticing the things I was trying to hide, I panicked. I thought if I just kept you in the dark, kept you safe, we could go on like everything was normal. I didn't want to lose you, Tunde. Tunde took a step back, his mind spinning. His initial suspicion, that Ifeoma was hiding an affair or some other personal betrayal, seemed so far removed from the reality she was now revealing. What kind of danger had she gotten involved in? And what kind of people was she trying to protect him from? For the next few hours, Ifeoma and Tunde sat together, talking in hushed voices. Ifeoma explained everything she knew about the mysterious group, their criminal activities, and the threat they posed to anyone who tried to leave. She had been blackmailed into helping them at first, then entangled deeper when the stakes got higher. She had tried to get out of the group on several occasions, but each time, they had found a way to pull her back in. Tunde listened, his emotions torn. On one hand, he was furious. Furious at the danger she had put both of them in. Furious that she had lied to him for so long. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the fact that she had been trying to protect him. I had to keep you safe, Ifeoma whispered. I thought the best way was to push you away, to make you think I didn't care. But I was wrong. I should have told you everything. I just didn't know how. Tunde's heart ached as he looked at her. The woman he had once known, strong, independent and confident, was now vulnerable, afraid, and regretful. The weight of her words sank in. All this time, she hadn't been hiding from him, she had been hiding for him. Later that night, after hours of silence and contemplation, Tunde made a decision. He couldn't just walk away from her, not now, but he also couldn't ignore the danger. Ifeoma had put herself in a position where they both could be in danger. Tunde knew what he had to do. They would confront the situation together, but not in the way he had originally planned. I'm not going anywhere, Ifeoma, Tunde said, his voice steady. But we're not facing this alone. We need to figure out who's behind all of this, and we need to take them down before they destroy us. Ifeoma looked at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Tunde, are you sure? Are you ready for this? Tunde nodded. We've already lost so much. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything. As Tunde left her office that night, the weight of their new plan settled on his shoulders. He wasn't just faking his death anymore. He wasn't just trying to catch Ifeoma in a lie. Now it was about survival. The world they had once known had shifted, and there was no turning back. But there was still so much they didn't know. Who were the people involved? How far did their reach go? And would Tunde and Ifeoma be able to escape the web of lies before it was too late? The next few days passed in a blur for Tunde and Ifeoma. They spent most of their time researching the group Ifeoma had been involved with, trying to uncover their identity and their connections. Ifeoma's fear of the group ran deep. she knew they had eyes everywhere, and even the smallest mistake could put them both in grave danger. Tunde was more determined than ever, but he knew they couldn't take on this enemy without a plan. The couple began to meet in secret, communicating through coded messages and discreet phone calls. Tunde had to be cautious, as Ifeoma had warned him that the group could be watching her every move. But despite the danger, he was resolute. They had to expose the truth, whatever it took. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Tunde received an unexpected call. It was from Emeka, a close friend from his past who had recently become involved in investigative journalism. Emeka had always been someone Tunde could trust, someone who had helped him in difficult times. The urgency in Emeka's voice on the other end of the line sent a chill down Tunde's spine. "Tunde, listen to me carefully," Emeka said, his voice low. "I've been digging into this group you told me about. And what I found? It's worse than we thought. They're not just involved in petty crimes or blackmail. They have connections at the highest levels, politicians, business tycoons, even law enforcement. You've got to be careful." Tunde's heart raced. "What do you mean? Who are they? What do they want with Ifeoma?" "I don't know their full motives yet," Emeka replied. "But they've been running operations all over the country. They're dangerous, Tunde. And they've got eyes on Ifeoma now that they know you're involved. I've got some intel on a meeting they're having tonight. If you want to get to the bottom of this, you need to be there." Tunde clenched his fists, trying to keep his composure. "Where is it?" "I'll go. I need answers." Emeka hesitated. "Be careful, man. This is a trap. If you show up, you're putting yourself in the lion's den. But if you want to save Ifeoma, you've got to risk it." Tunde didn't even think twice. He couldn't back down now. He had already come too far. That evening, Tunde drove out to the location Emeka had given him, a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town. The area was dimly lit and empty, the kind of place where shady deals and illicit exchanges took place. As he parked his car and stepped out, the silence felt suffocating. The only sound was the echo of his footsteps on the gravel. He approached the entrance cautiously, staying low to the ground. His instincts were on high alert. Through a crack in the door, he saw a handful of men sitting around a table. At the head of the table was a man Tunde recognized, Bayo, a powerful businessman with connections to several high-profile figures. Tunde watched quietly, his heart pounding. He had hoped to catch a glimpse of Ifeoma, but she was nowhere in sight. Instead, Bayo and the others were discussing plans that sent a chill down his spine. "We need to move fast," Bayo said, his voice cold and commanding. "The girl is slipping through our fingers. We need to pressure her, make sure she doesn't talk. If she does, we'll all be in danger. You know what we have to do." Tunde's mind raced. The girl. Was he talking about Ifeoma? He strained to hear more, but the words became muffled as another figure walked into the room. It was a woman, someone Tunde had never seen before, but her cold demeanor and business-like manner sent a shockwave through him. She had a stern look on her face, and she wasted no time as she walked straight to Bayo. "I told you we can't wait any longer," the woman said firmly. "She knows too much. We need to act now before this whole thing blows up in our faces." Bayo nodded, but his expression was full of concern. "I know. We'll deal with it. But there's one more thing. Tunde's still alive. He's been watching her, asking too many questions. He's a liability." Tunde's blood ran cold. "They know I'm still alive?" The conversation continued, and Tunde's fears were confirmed. The group knew about him, and they were planning to deal with him next. It wasn't just Ifeoma in danger anymore. He was now in their crosshairs, and he had no idea how far their reach went. Tunde quickly retreated, leaving the warehouse as quietly as he could. His mind was racing with the implications of what he had just overheard. They knew he was alive. They had plans to silence him. But the most shocking revelation was the mention of Ifeoma. She wasn't just a victim caught in a dangerous web, she was the key to everything. Tunde had to act fast. If he was going to save her and himself, he needed to confront Ifeoma again. But this time, it wouldn't just be about uncovering the truth, it was about survival. Back at his apartment, Tunde tried to process everything he had just learned. The group had more power than he had ever imagined. They were willing to go to extreme lengths to keep their operations hidden. But what exactly did they want from Ifeoma? What secrets did she know that were so dangerous? He had to warn her. He had to bring her into this fight, but could he trust her now? The phone rang again, breaking his thoughts. It was Emeka. "Tunde, are you there?" Emeka's voice sounded urgent. "I'm here," Tunde replied, his voice tight with anxiety. "I heard everything. They're planning to go after me, and they're after Ifeoma too. We need to move fast." Emeka paused for a moment, then spoke in a grim tone. "I don't think you understand. They've already got her. Ifeoma is in their hands right now." Tunde's heart dropped. "What do you mean? How do you know?" "I got a tip," Emeka said quickly. "They're holding her at an abandoned estate on the outskirts of town. You need to go now, before they move her." The clock was ticking. Tunde had no choice. Ifeoma was in more danger than ever. He had to rescue her before it was too late. Tunde's mind raced as he listened to Emeka's words. The reality of the situation had just hit him full force. Ifeoma was in their hands now. The group had taken her, and time was running out. He couldn't afford to waste another second. "I'll go now," Tunde said, his voice determined. "Get me all the details. I'll find her." Emeka's voice was strained with urgency. "Tunde, you don't understand. They've already moved her. I don't know where they're taking her, but they're planning to make sure she doesn't talk. If you go in blind, you'll be walking into a trap. You need help. You can't do this alone." Tunde didn't hesitate. "I've already risked everything. I'm going. I'll figure it out." Without another word, Tunde hung up the phone. He grabbed his jacket and ran out the door, heading straight for the abandoned estate that Emeka had mentioned. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he was willing to face whatever it took to save Ifeoma. The night air was thick with tension as Tunde drove through the narrow, winding roads on the outskirts of town. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Ifeoma. He had to get to her, but he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. He knew the group's network was far-reaching, and they had probably anticipated him making a move. They wouldn't let her go without a fight. As he approached the estate, the looming mansion seemed eerily silent, its windows dark and lifeless. There were no signs of movement, but Tunde knew better than to let his guard down. The mansion was built in a secluded area, and it looked abandoned, but that didn't mean it was empty. The group had to be hiding something there, and Ifeoma was the key. Tunde parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, moving quietly through the brush and staying low to the ground. The mansion loomed ahead, its stone walls covered in creeping vines. It looked like it had been left to decay for years, but Tunde didn't trust the facade. This was the perfect place for them to hide, away from prying eyes. He carefully crept up to the back entrance of the mansion, where he noticed a dim light flickering in a window. It was a small, isolated room on the ground floor. He peered inside and saw several men sitting around a table, talking in hushed voices. At the center of the room was a figure, tied to a chair. Tunde's breath caught in his throat. Ifeoma. Her head hung low, and her body was still, but Tunde could see that she was alive. The sight of her made his heart race with both relief and dread. He had to get to her, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. These men weren't going to let her go without a fight. Inside the room, Bayo and his associates were discussing their next move. The woman who had been with Bayo earlier was now standing beside him, her expression cold and calculating. "I told you this was going to happen," she said, her voice firm. "We can't just let her go. Not after everything she knows." Bayo nodded, his face grim. "We've already invested too much. We can't let her talk." They both turned their attention to Ifeoma, who was still unconscious. She had been drugged to keep her docile. The woman walked over to her, inspecting her face, before turning back to Bayo. "We'll make sure she never talks," the woman said with finality. "Once we're done, there won't be a trace of her left." Tunde's blood ran cold at the words. They were planning to kill Ifeoma. Tunde swallowed his fear and made his move. He couldn't waste any more time. He slipped through the back door and crept into the mansion, staying in the shadows. He was close now. He could hear the men talking in the next room. He rounded the corner, keeping his footsteps light. The door to the room where Ifeoma was held was ajar, and Tunde took a deep breath before pushing it open. Inside, the men were distracted, still discussing what to do with Ifeoma. Tunde saw his chance. He sprinted across the room, quietly as possible, and reached her side. He quickly untied her hands and whispered urgently in her ear. "Ifeoma, it's me. Tunde. Wake up, we need to get out of here." Ifeoma stirred, her eyelids flickering open. She looked confused at first, but then her eyes widened as she realized who it was. "Tunde," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the drugs. "You shouldn't have come. They'll kill you if they find out you're here." "I don't care," Tunde said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to go. Now." He helped her to her feet, but before they could move, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Tunde's heart raced as he realized the men were coming back. "They're coming," Ifeoma said, her voice panicked. "We need to hide." Tunde didn't have time to think. He grabbed Ifeoma's hand and pulled her toward the back door, his mind racing for an escape plan. But just as they reached the door, the sound of a gunshot rang out, followed by shouts from the other side of the house. Tunde's eyes widened. They were too late. The group had already discovered their escape attempt. Without thinking, Tunde pushed Ifeoma ahead of him, running toward the woods behind the mansion. He could hear the men shouting now, their heavy footsteps pounding behind them. "Ifeoma, keep running," Tunde shouted. The two of them sprinted through the thick underbrush, branches scratching at their faces as they made their way deeper into the forest. They couldn't stop now. The men would be closing in fast, and if they got caught, it would be the end. But just as Tunde thought they might make it to safety, a shadow moved in front of them, blocking their path. It was Bayo. "I told you this was a mistake," Bayo sneered, a gun in his hand. "You think you can escape me? You're dead wrong." Tunde's heart pounded in his chest as he backed up, pulling Ifeoma behind him. Bayo's men were closing in from all sides. He had no choice. He was cornered. But then, just as Tunde thought all hope was lost, a shot rang out. Bio fell to the ground, his gun skidding across the dirt. Tunde turned, and his eyes widened in disbelief. It was Amika. "I told you I'd have your back," Amika said, walking toward them with a grim expression. "But we need to move fast. We're not out of the woods yet."